So coming up is going to be Contender Series 2024, week number 5, and as we do approach the halfway point of the season, I think that we have seen a pretty good season so far, and I do think that week number 5 is going to continue some very good momentum, as this is going to be a card which is kind of dominated by strikers, because in the main event, you've got two kickboxers in Navajo, Sterling and Phillip Latu. Yousri Belgaroui comes from a glory kickboxing background, fighting against a karate fighter, Taiga Iwasaki. And then Otar Tanzilov versus Josias Musasa is just going to be a banger on the feet. It probably ends in the first round and someone is going to get knocked out. That's a great fight. And then aside from that, I do expect a lot of grappling in the women's fight. And I do think that Kody Steele will look to wrestle against the Muay Thai fighter in Quemel Ottoni. But of course, I will talk about that later on in the video. Very quick week number 4 recap. It wasn't a good card for me, I think. I mean, I went 3 and 2 on picks. I did pick Sal Killed, Bashi, and Xiang Hung Ko. And Xiang Hung Ko really saved the card. That was a plus 250 underdog that I managed to predict correctly. Will Curry just didn't really show up. I mean, Jordan Santos boxing and pressure and takedown defense, just kind of everything was a little bit too much in that one. And Jordan Santos really showed out as a big underdog, so shout out to everyone that picked him. And then Eunice Dubin just kind of comes out of nowhere after fighting nobody, and Shannon Clark just decides to stand still in the middle of the cage and literally begs to get knocked out. But happy for Eunice Dubin. Sounds like she was going through a bit before the fight camp, so it'll be very interesting to see how all of these prospects end up in the UFC, because all of them got contracts. I do think that a couple of them might end up doing a little bit better than others, but nonetheless, I did actually really enjoy the card, and I did actually agree with signing all 5 prospects, if that makes sense, even if some of the reasoning might have been a little bit iffy in the post-fight speech by Dana White there. But before we do get into this one, I know I'm a little bit late, but I did have my article up on the We Want Picks website, $14 per month, just very early, I believe. I had it up before week number 4 was even broadcast, and that's because I went overseas. I visited some family overseas, and now I'm back, obviously recording this video, but for $10 per month, you get access to a lot of We Want Picks premium content, and you get a 3-day free trial if you do sign up using that code ARTEM. And with all of that being said, now let's get into my predictions. So starting off the card, we actually have my lowest confidence pick of the card, with Corinne Laframboise fighting against Nicolle Caliari, and I am actually picking Corinne Laframboise, even though it has kind of seemed like the Canadians haven't been able to get many wins on the Contender Series this year. And to tell you how low in confidence I genuinely am in her, I actually expected her to be the underdog. She actually is the favorite right now at minus 130, but the odds kind of look like they're kind of shifting a little bit, so maybe some money is going to come in on Caliari by the time that the fight does roll around. But the reason why I have picked Corinne Laframboise is just because I do think that her grappling is a lot better than Nicolle Caliari's. But the problem is with the striking. I do think that you can draw some parallels to this matchup as you can actually to the Dubin versus Clark matchup in week number 4. And with that, you might just think, well, Dubin won, so Caliari's going to win. And maybe you probably could apply that logic, but I do think in this matchup, we are going to see Laframboise really showcase her grappling, because her grappling is really, really good. Now, her striking, not so much. She just doesn't really have that much striking defense. Shannon Clark didn't either, and it got her knocked out, but I don't see Nicolle Caliari landing that same sort of powerful punch is what Dubin did, because Caliari is much more of a high volume striker, not really a powerful striker. I do worry a little bit as well about Laframboise's way to get the fights down to the ground, because the way that she does typically get, well, nearly every single takedown of hers is when she clinches up and then uses her size advantage, which she does typically have, and then gets those trip takedowns. Usually that's pretty scary because you can get reversed in those positions. We have seen in high level MMA, a lot of the time it gets reversed and it just doesn't really end up working, but I do think that it should match in this fight somewhat, because I do think that Laframboise is good enough in the grappling compared to Caliari. Caliari is an interesting one because there is a lot of tape on her, but it is somewhat hard to find. Mostly you can find her older fights and then a couple of her very recent fights. Now, she has fought for a couple of interesting promotions recently. She fought for Face the Danger, and I don't think I've ever been able to find Face the Danger tape where she just fought a girl that was 0-3. And then Fight Music shows an interesting promotion where there is Muay Thai and boxing and MMA all on the same cards. but you can see quite a few of her other matchups. She has fought Kay Hansen, who was in the UFC at one point, and in that fight, Kay Hansen did just kind of dominate her on the ground for the most part, and you could kind of see some parallels with that fight potentially, but she did have some moments on the feet. I do think that she is going to be a lot smaller than Laframboise. I do think that Laframboise is going to have a pretty big strength advantage. I think she's going to have a size advantage, and I think that's really going to help her being the grappler. Now, the thing about Laframboise is that she hasn't fought for 2.5 years. There is a pretty good reason for that, and that is because she was actually meant to fight on the Contender Series last year against Rayan Guerrero, and that's a fight that I think that she would have actually won, but it turned out during her pre-fight medicals, they revealed that she was pregnant. So she didn't fight. She did have a baby and has been training since having the baby, so I guess maybe you could see that as a little bit of a red flag as well, but I'm still going to side with Laframboise, as I do think she should be able to use that size advantage to win in the grappling. And now we can move up to Otar Tanzilov fighting against Josias Musasa, and this is going to be a banger. In fact, I'm really looking forward to this fight because I do genuinely believe there's a good chance it ends in the first round. Now that I've said that, it's probably going to go all 3 rounds because this year, a lot of fights that are predicted to go to decision have ended in the first round. So we'll see how this one ends up going. But Otar Tanzilov is a massive bantamweight. Like, this guy is definitely... Maybe he actually genuinely is a 5'11" bantamweight because this guy is so much bigger than all of his opponents. And what he mostly does is he does mostly use kicks to fight on the outside of his opponent's range. He does have very good side-to-side movement, but it can gas him up pretty quickly because if you do watch his fights and he does exit the first round, he does slow down quite a bit. He did fight against another striker in Eduardo Diniz, and he did look pretty visibly tired in the second round in that matchup. And then in his more recent fight, he fought against a wrestler in Hikmatullah Abdullayev, and Hikmatullah Abdullayev just was ragdolling him for the whole first round. Tanzilov was defending very well. He was put in some pretty tough positions, but going into that second round, both guys were gassed. And then Tanzilov was able to defend the takedowns a lot better, was able to find success in round number 2 and round number 3 with the striking. I haven't seen Tanzilov implement a lot of offensive wrestling at all. He was trying to get a few reversals against Abdullayev, but Abdullayev was the better wrestler in that matchup. But he did get a 3rd round takedown against Eduardo Diniz. But Otar Tanzilov, what he wants to do is he wants to use his movement. He uses side-to-side movement a lot. He uses his size advantage very well because he does have a ridiculously long reach, and he does also have, long legs, so he kicks a lot. That's kind of mostly his game plan. Fighting against Josias Musasa, I like Josias Musasa because I think that this guy might genuinely be one of the most powerful guys that I have seen at this weight class. This guy lands with one punch, and he puts people out cold. This guy has a crazy highlight reel of him just knocking people out with one shot. It is kind of insane, actually, to be honest with you. But I do kind of worry a little bit about Josias Musasa because I do think that he is quite one-dimensional. He mostly does just box. That's kind of his whole game, is boxing, relying on that power. And the way that he does use that boxing is he is kind of just running forward a little bit and just landing massive bombs. I don't think he really has great grappling. I do understand that he's got a couple of ground and pound wins. I know he won this fight by ground and pound, but I believe it was this fight here against Gazmir Diata where he actually won it with ground and pound while in mount. But aside from that, I do worry a little bit about the well-roundedness. I believe a commentator even mentioned in one of the more recent fights that he had only just started training and grappling. So if anyone's going to have the grappling advantage, it's probably going to be Tanzilov, because although Tanzilov doesn't really have great offensive wrestling, I think it should be good enough to potentially take down Musasa, who may have a limited grappling experience. And I know that Tanzilov's defensive grappling is very good, but I don't think that this fight takes place on the ground. I think that this fight takes place on the feet, and I think that someone is getting knocked out. I do think the fighter more likely to land the just one punch KO blow, putting the other opponent out unconscious, is Musasa. But I do think that Otar Tanzilov is just a different matchup that Musasa has never seen. Musasa hasn't really fought anyone that's going to have the movement of Tanzilov, that's going to have the kicks of Tanzilov, and that's where I think that Tanzilov is really going to be able to upset Musasa, really kicking the body, really working from range. Those leg kicks I think are going to be landing as well, and that's how I think that Otar Tanzilov eventually gets it done. But Tanzilov's boxing, his hands aren't that smooth. I don't think they're that crisp. I think he can be hit in the pocket, and that's where Musasa's best chance is to get that first round KO. But I think someone is getting slept in the first, and I think unfortunately it is going to be Musasa. So the pick is going to be Otar Tanzilov to win this one here. Minus 275 favorite. Pretty wide for a matchup which really can go either way with the KOs, but I do think that Tanzilov should be able to get this done. I do think he does find the finish as well in this fight. And now we have Yousri Belgaroui fighting against Taiga Iwasaki, and this is a pretty odd sort of matchup because, as I did say in the intro, it is a striker versus striker matchup, but Taiga Iwasaki very recently has started to implement a lot of grappling into his game. If you do watch Taiga Iwasaki, he is a striker, he is a karate guy, that's his background, but then he did fight against Rafael Lovato Jr., who was one of the most successful, to my knowledge anyway, BJJ fighters from the US ever. And Rafael Lovato Jr. just kind of ragdolled him a little bit, even actually landed a couple of good strikes on the feet. It was an odd fight just to kind of make in general, but Lovato Jr. got the submission pretty quickly in the first round after a couple of takedowns. And then after that, Taiga Iwasaki just decided that he wasn't going to be a striker anymore, and he fought this whole fight here against Eun-Soo Kim, trying to wrestle. He was wrestling the whole fight, trying to get the takedown, and to be honest with you, was really struggling to get the takedown, and I kind of thought that his offensive wrestling didn't look that effective in this matchup, and I didn't think that it looked effective enough to take down Yousri Belgaroui. Now, I do understand that Belgaroui had a bad performance on the Contender Series last year, but that really can be put down to a few things. I think one of them is the fact that he was actually ill. He was actually sick when he fought against Marco Tulio, and although a lot of people thought that Tulio should have been given the contract, the reason why Tulio wasn't given that contract was because he didn't put up a great performance himself against a Belgaroui that was ill. Yousri Belgaroui since then has actually moved up to 205 pounds, and in my opinion has looked really good there, so I don't understand why he's coming back down to 185. These last two fights have been at 205 pounds. He's been significantly bigger than both of his opponents there. He genuinely is 6'5" at 185, and I don't understand how he makes the weight because he looks massive at 205 pounds. But to talk about Yousri Belgaroui's fighting style, he is a former Glory kickboxer. He does have pretty good accolades. I believe he's fought Adesanya and Pereira, and now he trains with Pereira. He's even beaten Jason Wilness by KO in round 1, so that's pretty nuts. But he's fought Adesanya, he's fought Alex Pereira. I believe he's beaten Alex Pereira, and yeah, he just has a good Glory kickboxing background. But when you watch his fights, he's got a very, very odd striking style because he uses his height somewhat effectively, but he just kind of has his hands genuinely by his waist, and his head like leans forward. Like with Alex Pereira, he kind of has his hands like kind of somewhat high, and the head's actually quite like back and upright. Belgaroui's leaning forward, and his hands are low, and he's just kind of like dodging forwards and backwards. It's so hard to explain, but it's just a very odd striking style, and he's pretty low volume, and he doesn't really commit 100% to all of his shots either, which is why he hasn't really been getting these one-punch KOs that I think a lot of people might be expecting him to get. Taiga Iwasaki, sorry, I don't think in any means is actually really a small middleweight, but he's going to look small in this matchup against Belgaroui. I don't know how Belgaroui makes 185, man. This guy's going to be huge, and I do think that he should be good enough on the feet to be safe from Iwasaki's KO power, which he does have. I think he's going to be good enough on the feet as well to keep Iwasaki at bay, and I think he's just ultimately going to be a very frustrating fight for Iwasaki, because I do think that Belgaroui's takedown defense is going to be good enough. If Eun-Soo Kim's takedown defense was good enough, I really hope Belgaroui's takedown defense is good enough. So I do just think that this is a pretty good matchup for Belgaroui in general, and I actually think he will find a stoppage at some point, maybe in the second or the third round. So I'm going to pick Yousri Belgaroui minus 350, so the odds makers have really seen it as a pretty favorable matchup for him as well. And then we have Cody Steele fighting against Quemel Ottoni. I think that Quemel Ottoni could be a really good underdog here. Now, the pick is Cody Steele, but I'm actually not super confident in this fight here, because Quemel Ottoni, he was a lot better watching him on tape than I remember him being. If you guys don't know who Quemel Ottoni is, He actually does have a win over Alex Pereira in MMA in 2015, so a very long time ago. But yes, he does have the win over the Alex Pereira himself in Alex's debut. And then he did have quite a bit of mixed success, fighting some pretty decent levels of competition on the regional scene. And then recently he's been pretty inactive, and that's because he signed to the PFL. And all three of his PFL fights were cancelled for some reason or another. Not really too sure why, but they just all were, so he actually hasn't fought since 2022. Quemel Ottoni, I would say mostly is actually a Muay Thai fighter. Now, I do understand that he does have very good grappling, but he does spend a very significant amount of time in his fights fighting on the feet. He is very much a Muay Thai fighter. He's got very, very good kicks. He does kick very well to the legs and to the body, and he does maintain range pretty well. The way that you can beat Quemel Ottoni on the feet is by getting in close in the boxing range and landing some big shots on him in the boxing, or you can take him down because his takedown defense is somewhat questionable. Now, his grappling, pure grappling, is actually very good because Ottoni does have quite a few submissions in his career, but if you do watch his fights, it does seem like he is striking for the majority of it, and that kind of is his main intention, even though he does have good grappling in the back pocket. Cody Steele is a guy that the UFC likes, and the reason I know this is because he was actually given the Contender Series offer when he was only 5-0 as a professional. So this guy had only 5 professional fights. The matchmakers wanted him to be on the Contender Series, but he decided that he was going to take a bit of a risk, and he fought against the toughest opponent he has ever fought so far in Alejandro Martinez. And I am very glad that I was able to watch that fight, because in my opinion, that was his best performance in his MMA career by far. I thought against Nico Echeverri, he actually gave up a couple of potential opportunities for a better boxer, because Nico Echeverri in 2023 was landing some pretty decent boxing combinations on him, but it actually seemed like he had really rapidly improved that striking in that period of time against Martinez, when he beat Martinez mostly with his boxing. And that was very impressive, because I personally really kind of view Cody Steele as mostly more of a wrestler kind of fighter. And yes, in that fight against Alejandro Martinez, he did attempt a lot of takedowns, and he didn't necessarily get every takedown he attempted, but I did really like seeing the mix-up with the boxing and the wrestling, and I do actually think that that's how he's going to be able to defeat Quemel Ottoni in this matchup here. Cody Steele is my pick because I like his boxing on the inside. He's very clearly improving, and he's improving very quickly. If you do watch the fight between Echeverri and Alejandro Martinez, he has made some very rapid improvements in this period of time. Echeverri was landing some pretty decent strikes on him on the feet, and then against Martinez, who in my opinion is a better opponent, it was Steele really leading the dance with the boxing, so that was very impressive for me to see. And Quemel Ottoni's inactivity, he was active at one point, but he hasn't fought for 2 and a bit years. It's kind of hard to tell what he's going to look like right now. He pulled out of a lot of PFL fights. Is he injury prone right now? Like, what's really going on there? I do like Steele, though. I think he can mix it up. I think he's going to mix in the boxing, and he's going to mix in the wrestling here. And I think he can win a decision, but at minus 260... I'm personally not minus 260 confident, I'll be honest with you. Quemel Ottoni plus 200, he could be a pretty good underdog to kind of keep your eye on in this fight. And now we have Navajo Stirling fighting against Phillip Latu. Navajo Stirling obviously does fight out of City Kickboxing. He is from New Zealand. I have talked to Navajo Stirling before, so I will just kind of put that out there. Maybe there will be a bit of a hint of bias, and if you don't like that, then maybe you can take my opinion on this fight with a bit of a grain of salt. But in my opinion, I think that this is actually a pretty good matchup for Navajo, even though he has actually accepted this fight on short notice. Phillip Latu, let's talk about the history of the fight. This fight's a mess. It was actually originally meant to be Rafael Sequeira versus Uran Satibaldiev, and then it ended up being Rafael Sequeira versus Francisco Mazzio, and then Francisco Mazzio versus Phillip Latu, and then Mazzio has visa issues. Navajo Stirling steps up on short notice, just arrived in the USA, I believe, a few days ago. So he's going to be in the USA for about 5 days or so before the fight does start. But he accepted this fight on, I believe, about a week and a half's notice, maybe just a little bit longer or shorter than that. Navajo Sterling, he is a kickboxer, does have a good kickboxing background. If you do look into him, he has won the King in the Ring tournament, which is the tournament which Carlos Olberg has won, which is the tournament which a few other CKB guys have had success at, and he is actually a world champion in kickboxing for, I believe, a smaller kickboxing promotion or entity. I forgot the name, but I think it was like WGKB or something along those lines. Navajo Sterling beat a guy from France to do that. But in MMA, he's looked pretty good. He's fought very often, which is pretty fun to see. He's beaten a few decent guys. I mean, Calvin Fitial is the guy that Junior Tuffer defeated before getting into the UFC, and he won that one with a slam. And then aside from that, he's beaten a couple of veterans. Sam K is a former PFL veteran. To be fair, I would say that he hasn't really fought the strongest level of competition so far, but I do think that he has looked very good doing it, and he does have a lot of good accolades behind him. He does have some wrestling and some grappling. We saw the slam against Kevin Fitial, and I have also heard word of some local BJJ tournaments that he's been competing in and has been winning using his grappling there. He takes on Phillip Latu, who is a bit of an interesting fighter for me because I don't know for sure if he is going to be 6'3". I think that the face-off really is just going to tell us how tall either guy is, really, because he didn't look that much taller, or if any taller, against this guy called Dylan Potter, who has actually been on the Contender Series before and was a short notice replacement on the Contender Series in the past. But against Dylan Potter, he didn't look that much taller than him, but I guess it was his stance, because he does fight with a pretty crouched stance, and he does, fight with a crouch stance, so maybe he looked a little bit shorter there, but what he does do very well, in my opinion, is just throw very powerful punches in the pocket. He's got decent kicks from range, and he does kick the legs quite effectively, but I think that the way that he does manage to win most of his fights, actually, is with his boxing on the inside. Now, I wouldn't say that it's the most technical, but I will say it is very powerful. It is how he's managed to KO he has KO'd every single opponent that he has ever fought in MMA, and he also has a professional kickboxing career, but since I'm not too familiar with Phillip Latu, I actually can't tell you to the extent of that one, but he does have a background in it. I think that this is a striker versus striker matchup. I do like Navajo Sterling in this one, even though it is on short notice. Navajo is a very patient striker. He does stalk from range, he does pressure forward, and I think that the leg kicks are going to add up. I think that the body shots are going to add up. And I think that all of that Rainbow Six Siege that he has been streaming on his Twitch is going to add up as well for his fast reaction time, is what he tells me. And then afterwards, he can celebrate with some KFC. But yeah, Navajo Sterling, he's got a Twitch, so follow him there. I don't know if Phillip Latu has a Twitch or anything like that, but I am going to pick Navajo Sterling. I do genuinely think that he wins. I do genuinely think that he does win by knockout, but if you do see it as a little bit of bias, I just kind of want to put full transparency out there. He's minus 200 now. He opened up at minus 166, and when that happened, I thought that was a little bit close, but it is short notice. Anything can happen, but I do like Sterling to go up there and get the win, and it seems like the Tapology voters do as well. Let me know what you think of this card. Let me know what you think of my predictions, and with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.